Hi, everybody, and welcome to our new essential new learning unit of Islam. We are basically going to spend the next 3 weeks or so looking at the religion of Islam. And then we're going to spend the last 2 weeks or so looking at kind of other religions and cults or so. The last week for seniors, or last day for seniors, if you're not aware, this is June 10th. And so after that, the assignments will mainly involve watching movies and checking out other stuff for stuff like that for the few juniors that are left. And so the purpose of this lecture is to give you guys kind of a broad overview using IB's questions in a way that you know, right? And what I've got put up there is I've got up there like, hey, look at this lecture, read this thing, watch this video, and then come up with some questions on Islam that you would like to explore, that you'd like me to go into. Because what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do the basic overview and the 4 key questions, right? And then sprinkled throughout the next 3 weeks, I'll have like, one thing on like why are we here, what is the human condition, where are we going, and how do we get there, one on each of them, right? But then I'm also going to be doing things that you guys want to do, various case studies, various things to talk about, et cetera, since I don't necessarily have to follow IB quite as much. And so that's when like this comes in. So after you've done this, you'll go just on turnitin.com and propose like some questions that you'd like to answer, and then I'll kind of put together the last things or the rest of the things that we're going to do on this. So with this in mind, let's go ahead and start talking about Islam. And what you see right there is the crescent and the star, which is the symbol of Islam, and the color as well, which is green. Now, to be clear, just so as I go into this, we all understand everything. Islam is the noun for this religion, and Muslim is the adjective, right? You can also use Islamic, and we'll kind of talk about the difference in that, right? But that's what we're talking about here. So, like, Muslim is not a religion. Like, someone can be a Muslim, or Muslim or something like that, but like Islam is the religion, just to be clear here. Okay, so the first thing I want to show you when thinking about and looking at Islam are some possible stats on the world Muslim population. Now, to be honest, it's really hard to get a handle on the number of Muslims in the world for a number of reasons. That's very different from, say, like getting a good handle on the number of Christians in the world, right? For example, a large number of Muslims live in places that are not the most reliable when it comes to counting people, taking census, accounting for that, etc., etc. Particularly if they are in places that have experienced any type of violence recently. Okay. On top of that, a large number of Muslims also live in places where like Islam is really kind of the only game in town. So like it becomes, do you just count every single person that lives in Iran as Muslim, like, or is there like, how do you actually discern that, stuff like that? So depending on how you think about this, and that's why I'm saying that, because you will see numbers all over the place on the number of Muslims in the world. You will get numbers that are somewhere between about 1.3 to 1.4 billion, all the way as high as like 2 billion. The overarching agreement, though, from everybody is that it is the second largest religion in the world, and it's the fastest growing religion in the world. Here's another way to look at it too that might give you a better idea. Basically, the darker the color of blue, the higher percentage of the world's Muslim population lives in that area. And you can see the vast majority of it is centered in the Middle East, North Africa, and then actually the largest Muslim country in the entire world is actually Indonesia, or a Muslim country. I have some issues with that term, so if I use it, I apologize. Just know that it's said in slipping and for lack of a better way. But the largest country that has a major influence of Islam is actually Indonesia. So if you look down in Southeast Asia too, and those are the kind of the key things. And then you kind of see it spread in other places throughout the world. Not so much in like North America and South America and stuff like that. Really quick thing before I start this. If you go back to the other slide, and I can't in the thing here, I'm just really kind of curious why Antarctica is colored at all. That's all. That's all I want to say. You can go back and rewind if you feel like looking at that or not. All right. Anyway, I forgot to say it in that slide, and I just really needed to get that in here to feel like I'd done a decent job teaching. All right. Let's talk about the basic overview of this religion here. Okay. It is the youngest of the world's major religions. And by that, I mean it was literally the last one founded. It's the last Abrahamic religion founded, but it was also the last one of any of the major Eastern religions founded that we've talked about. The other one that you could go into as well as Sikhism, which actually like is one thing that I really wish I had a chance to cover, but I don't. And that would be founded a little bit later. And it's founded around 610 CE with the revelation of the Quran by the angel Gabriel to the Prophet Muhammad. Um, and it's believed, or it's not only believed, it sees itself as an outgrowth of like the other Abrahamic religions. Muslims hold Jews and Christians in a special place, slightly lower than themselves, but higher than other religions. They call them people of the book, etc., etc. Almost all Muslims will eventually agree that like they'll be allowed into paradise and stuff along those lines, etc., etc. So like it is another Abrahamic religion. Many Muslims will date the founding of the religion back to Abraham, as we'll talk about a little bit later on. If you remember, Abraham had two wives. To people that he had kids with. Sorry, the wife or concubine is debatable. One was Sarah, who like then became the person that kind of followed like the lineage on down towards the Judeo-Christian end of it, and the other was Hagar, who had a kid Ishmael with. And I mentioned at the time that eventually Ishmael's descendant would eventually be Muhammad, and so this is the other part of it. Now, Islam is divided into two key branches. Okay, those would be Sunni and Shia. 99% of all Muslims you've ever met are, unless you happen to be Muslim yourself, in which case you might know other people in the community. But if you're not, 99% of them are Sunni Muslims. That makes up about 85% of all Muslims to begin with. The vast majority of all Shia Muslims exist in the state of Iran. Iran and Iraq were set up to be the Shia states at this point, in kind of a native thing. There are also other things like Sufi mysticism and stuff along those lines, etc., that we may have a chance to talk about later. The religion was founded by the Prophet Muhammad. You'll see in parentheses there it says PBUH, because when Muslims say his name, the Prophet Muhammad, they should say may peace be upon him, or peace be upon him, so PBUH, who's believed to be Allah's last and greatest prophet. It recognizes all the Judeo-Christian prophets from Abraham and Moses on down. As a matter of fact, Jesus is seen to be one of the most important prophets in the history of Islam, and is a very important figure in Islam. He's just not the Messiah / Son of God. As we talked about, it is the second largest religion in the world. It is unquestionably monotheistic. Islam means submission to the will of God, Allah, with like devotion to Him. It believes in the oneness of the soul. You'll go to heaven and hell upon death. There are like very clear things on that. Sacred texts in Islam include the Quran, the Hadith, various other kind of writings from various imams and stuff like that. There are three really holy cities in Islam in order. They are Mecca, Medina, and then Jerusalem. And there's some important places listed there. And then holy days in Islam include things like Ramadan and Eid and stuff along those lines that we'll kind of talk about if we have a chance as we go through here. Now, getting a handle and getting stats on American Muslims, though, is significantly easier. As of last check, and to be honest, I only check and update these things every like 3 to 5 years, but as of last check, you had between 8 to 10 million American Muslims, and about 30% of those were African American Muslims, okay? And if you look at the part on the right, that gives you kind of an ethnic breakdown of like Muslims in the United States, okay? It is a very diverse community, and it's really important to remember when thinking about American Muslims and Muslims as a whole that not all Arabs are Muslim and not all Muslims are Arab. And that is really something that like students kind of forget from time to time. Another way of looking at the diversity within the American Muslim community is to look at this too, which gives you a rough idea of white, African American, Hispanic, Asian, and then the lovely other, which I always get a kick out of, in U.S. Racial breakdowns. But this is from a Gallup poll, again in 2009, so we got to go back a little bit to sort these out. Now, it does take several years for the polls to get compiled and come out, so like some of the most recent ones we have would be like 2016 or so, but they don't run them every single time. So we do the information with the best we can. I did think the part on the side was fascinating, though, so I decided to put that part in there, which is that American Muslims are, on the whole, very young and very well educated. 67% of them has a bachelor's degree, compared with about 35% of Americans or so. 44% have higher than a bachelor's degree, and to that you're looking at less than like 20% of all Americans or so there. 67% of them are under 40, and then one of the most fascinating stats I found is that 1 in 10 American Muslims is either a physician or a medical doctor. So that gives you an idea of kind of the makeup in the community of the United States that we exist in and stuff like that. Let's now talk about some of the beliefs of Islam here. One thing that you gotta love about Islam, at least from the perspective of like differing from all the other religions we've talked about, is like its beliefs are pretty darn crystal clear. All of you who got kind of frustrated when I said like yeah or blah blah blah, or even times when we talk about stuff involving like Judaism or Christianity, when I'd say things like okay, but like the Satan being like, or sorry, the Satan, the serpent being Satan is like a tradition later and stuff like that. Well, no, Islam actually makes all that 100% clear. And you're going to find that the why are you here creation story is very very, very similar to Judaism and Christianity, with a couple differences here. Um, Allah, who is God within Islam, if you were not aware of that, created the world in 6 days. He took 4 days to create the earth, 2 days to create the stars, etc., stuff like that. He rested on Friday, and the Sabbath in Islam is Friday. The holy day is Friday. In a lot of countries where the predominant religion is Islam, schools will go from Sunday to Thursday for that reason, right? And then you have Friday and Friday afternoon prayers. And even, for example, like the person who does Friday afternoon prayers in Tehran is like actually a position that's highly sought after. It's a very important position, stuff like that. Um, so anyway, aside from that, so he creates the world, he creates that, and he creates three types of human beings. He creates angels. Angels are created from light. Their father is God. They have no free will. They do exactly what he says, and they are completely sinless. Okay. He creates human beings. Okay. This is true. These two are true in Judeo-Christian sources as well, and stuff like that, if not canonical. Human beings are created from earth, from clay, water, soil, sand. Okay. And they see their father as Adam, and they have free will. They can do stuff, which is why they sin and stuff like that. The other spirits that he creates spirits called jinn, okay? And I don't like to say, because the term genie does come from this, but they are not the same thing like that. Jinn are fire spirits, whose father is originally Satan. Satan, or he's eventually going to become known as Iblis, which is the devil or so. But if you remember, Satan from Judeo-Christian sources, which go to Islam also, was originally an angel and a fallen angel. And so jinn are, and you have good jinn and bad jinn. They're spirits that have free will, and they can do things. They can do things to affect human beings, kind of good, bad, and neutral. What this really is, to be honest, though, and this is important to understand from a scholarly perspective, is this is the syncretism. This is traditional ideas within the Middle East, and where this was like founded and stuff like that, coming into the religion and kind of being codified that way, right? So what happened here, for the why are we here, is that God, Allah, created Adam, and he ordered everybody to bow down to him, and everybody except for Satan or Iblis did that, and the bad jinn who followed Satan, right? And so God kicked them out of paradise, and Satan vowed his revenge, right? And so Adam and Eve are in paradise, and you have the exact same stories and stuff like that. But the big difference is that basically Satan is actively down here doing things. He's not just kind of opposing force like in Judaism or Christianity. Iblis is the serpent, for example, and stuff like that. He gets revenge, and basically, like, he tries to corrupt the earth and do things to mess with God's or Allah's like beautiful creation, and that is kind of the like dynamic of why we're here to start with. I put this next slide in to give you an idea of the original historical spread and significance of Islam and stuff like that. And if you start in Arabia, you've got Islam during the life of Muhammad, and as you'll find out when we start to like study and look at Muhammad's life and stuff like that, it was not overly accepted, and he was definitely persecuted at this time and stuff like that. But then within the first few hundred years, it spread out across Central Asia, down into India, into like North Africa, and then over into the Mediterranean and Europe, actually. And it makes its way through Spain, and it's very famously stopped at a battle called the Battle of Tours. And by it, I mean like what the Europeans describe as "quote unquote" the Muslim horde coming to invade the Christians, these evil, like, these pure Christians and these heathen Muslims. Stopped at the Battle of Tours by a dude by the name of Charles the Hammer Martel, which is one of the coolest nicknames in all of European history. Sorry, I'm dorking out on European history for 2 seconds here. And that was kind of the like spread, but almost everything except for Spain, though that still has massive like Muslim influence, has like some swath of Islam still left in it. I know down below it says Greek in the Mediterranean and stuff like that, but even when you get to like Bosnia Herzegovina and places like that, like I mean, Islam is one of the dominant, if not the most dominant religions in that area. It's a very different version of Islam than say Islam in Iran, but like it is still Islam. And one thing we'll talk about is how Islam does change significantly from country to country and where it's practiced. Okay, so the Muslim idea of the human condition here, okay? Allah created man, okay, and their job is to honor him for that creation, okay? And unlike some of like the ideas where like God may or may not, like Judeo-Christian ideas where God may or may not respond like to people, like Allah is not going to interfere or anything like that, but He actively does want you to like thank Him and honor Him and stuff like that, right? Now, having said that, He is a very reasonable individual, for lack of a better word, right? So, for example, in honoring Allah, you're supposed to pray 5 times a day. But let's say that like there's even something that's like a really important meeting and you can't, and you're going to be in the middle of that and you have to do it later. Well, you make up that prayer. Like that's no problem. You can stop and pray. Like, or I mean, you can make that prayer up like a couple hours later or something like that. He will be forgiving, stuff like that. I one time had a student who was Muslim looking at me and saying like, Doran, I'm supposed to pray, but I can't figure out which way is east. Or sorry, yeah, sorry, I can't figure out which way to. Sorry, because you are supposed to like pray in the direction of Mecca and the Kaaba and the black box that we'll talk about in a second. And after like thinking about this for a while, I just looked at her and I said, you know what, Allah is forgiving. Like pray and He will completely understand, and He very much is. That is very much true. God gave, that's the human condition. Allah gave people free will. Okay. Now, one thing that is important though, and they sin, and He knows that, and He knows that, and He is loving, and He will make sure, and He will forgive them, etc., etc. He does have a little bit of a breaking point though. As I said, He kind of falls somewhere between the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament, where the God in the New Testament, you could basically, shoot somebody and then apologize sincerely later, and He'd still let you into heaven. And the God of the New Testament, you could like, mutter a curse under our breath and He'll turn you into a pillar of salt, right? Allah is kind of somewhere in between. Like He'll absolutely forgive you, but you've got to legitimately try to like make things better and like, change and stuff like that. You don't have this long like list of steps like you do in Judaism or stuff like that. But He doesn't have you don't also have unlimited chances, like it's kind of like put forward in parts of Christianity. Now, in order to help instruct humans, Allah has sent down a series of prophets, beginning from Abraham down to Moses, David, Jesus, basically anybody important you can think of in the other parts of the Abrahamic faith tree is considered an important prophet in Islam. The most important one is Muhammad, and to him, the angel Gabriel revealed the final unaltered text of God. Muslims will freely admit that the Old and New Testament have been changed and stuff like that, but one thing that's really important about the Quran is that the Arabic has never been changed from the original revelation to Muhammad. So, like, other than that, you might look at translations and stuff like that, but the original Arabic has stayed exactly the same, okay? And now, with that all being said, Muslims are responsible for introducing the word of Allah to as many people as possible, okay? Now, let's note that, like, when I say this, it's supposed to be done peacefully. Like, the idea is to put forward kind of like, everybody should be involved in this, and we want as many people involved, like, kind of like a group achievement in, like, Mahayana but Buddhism or something like that. Like, let's get everybody into, like, heaven and stuff like that. And so the idea is that, like, you want to get as many people to achieve salvation and stuff like that. But it's supposed to be done peacefully. It's not supposed to be done forcefully. And I say this, like, twice and a couple times because this is one of the, like, multiple, like, misconceptions about Islam, right? And the other misconception that comes with this is that some of the very kind of strict moral codes and stuff like that are done because like that's seen as one of the better ways to like get everybody towards salvation and stuff like that. Now, whether that's true or not, that's what's put forward by like the chief leaders of the state and stuff like that, and that's the logic for it. And so it's not necessarily meant to be suppression as much as, okay, if everybody follows a strict moral code, then that will be closer to get us all to like, paradise, etc., etc. Which brings us to actually our next thing on this, and this is the Kaaba in Mecca, and I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, Kaaba. It's the most holy site in Islam. Now, to be clear, it is not worshipped. Okay, that would be massively sacrilege. Allah is the only thing that is worshipped. This is why Jesus is not the Son of God. This is why other people are not like no saints, anything like that. I mean, the only thing that is worshipped is Allah, and that is really important and fundamental to Islam. But the Kaaba is considered to be the house of God. Some people say that this is the place where like God revealed to Abraham that like he needed to sacrifice Isaac and do these things, and he was going to make him like the father and stuff like that. And it's actually involved in a number of the key parts of Islam. For example, when you pray 5 times a day, you're supposed to pray towards Mecca, facing it. And then the other thing you're seeing is the big pilgrimage, also known as the Hajj, right? Which is another one of the 5 pillars where you're supposed to circumambulate that and then a few other parts of it as you like make one of your pilgrimages during your lifetime. All Muslims are supposed to do this once during their lifetime. I'm told it's a fairly amazing experience. Okay, so third part out of 4 here. Where are we going? Okay, we're going to the afterlife. And Islam does not sugarcoat this in any way. If you're good and things are going well, you're going to Allah and you're going to be in paradise. And word is, it's amazing. Sin and you go to hell forever, which would really kind of generally suck. For lack of a better word, because it's torturous and you get split open by demons, and sit there and take like exactly what you'd think of the epitome of like a Middle Ages almost style heaven and hell, and you've got a Muslim version of that here, if that makes sense. It's very concrete, is what I'm trying to say. It's not this abstract, like maybe you're without Allah, but you're not tortured, blah, blah. No, it's heaven, hell there. Now, one of the things that is important to keep in hell, or keep in mind in hell, is that most Muslims have gotten to the point that Allah is merciful and stuff like that. And while he can condemn you to hell, it is also very possible to get out of hell in Islam. For example, a number of Muslims believe that you would. If, for example, like you've never been heard anything about Islam, like you might be in hell temporarily while you learn about it and then you're out of it and stuff like that. Others say, and you can see the quote down there about that, verily most honored you in the sight of Allah, he is most righteous, and Allah has full knowledge and is well acquainted with all things, etc., etc. So like, he understands that, and he'll be merciful, etc., etc. Other Muslims have even gone as far, more liberal Muslims, to say, well, I mentioned it earlier, that Jews and Christians will probably eventually get out of that they might be in hell for a little bit to start with. Others will say that everybody eventually makes it in there once they learn more about this, etc., etc. But that's massively in dispute, whether you can get out of hell and exactly who ends up there. The thing that is not in dispute is that good Muslims, for example, definitely go to paradise. Good Christians and Jews will also eventually definitely be allowed in, and that bad people will end up in like eternal damnation and torture. Um, just to kind of jog your memory and give you another view of this, this is the Dome of the Rock. We talked about this thing briefly when we were talking about Judaism and Israel and the Western Wall and stuff like that. And if you remember when we had the Western Wall and we had that case study about the Western Wall and praying and women and stuff like that, we talked about how the top, the Temple Mount of that, was reserved for Muslims. And on top is the Dome of the Rock right here. And this is the current site. This is also, as I said at the time, the site of where the Jewish temple should be, right? So this is why there is no temple, even though the Jews have been restored to Jerusalem. There is no temple, because to do that would involve demolishing the Dome of the Rock, and to demolish the Dome of the Rock would arguably start a world war, right? And so it's sit here. Now, this is meant to be the place, or supposed to be the place where Abraham then tried to sacrifice Isaac, like he was told about it below and stuff like that. And then up here, he tried to sacrifice him possibly, and then not to, and also the place for Muhammad's night of ascension, etc., etc. And it is considered to be one of the most famous, or not most famous, most sacred places in Islam, just like it is in Judaism and Christianity. Okay, last part of this here. How do we get here? And man, it looks like I might actually make it within my like 25-minute marker. Pretty darn close here. How do we get there? Well, the big thing is submission to Allah, and to do this, it includes most notably the five pillars of Islam, and they are as follows: the Shahada, Salat, Zakat, Sawam, and Hajj. Okay, and I'm sure I'm saying those wrong. The Shahada is the first one, is the profession of faith. You say there is no God but God, as Muhammad is his messenger. You say that with all your heart, you mean that, and bam, you've converted to Islam. That's it right there. Don't do that, though, not really meaning it, because if you then fall out of being Muslim, like your apostasy, right, you fall into like not being Muslim anymore, that's actually a very, very bad sin in Islam. The second salat is prayer 5 times a day. We've already talked about that. You pray facing Ramadan. There are specific times you're supposed to do it. Many Muslims even wake up in the middle of the night to do it. The third zakat is given to charity. This is actually collected by the local mosque, but it's not allowed to be used for the mosque in any way whatsoever, and you're supposed to give at least 2% of your income to charity to be given away directly to the poor, not for religious purposes or anything like that. Swam is fasting during Ramadan, during the religious festival of Ramadan, which occurs at different times, depending on the year and the calendar and stuff like that. Muslims are supposed to fast for the entire day, and then they break their fast at night. This is really important part of Islam. And then the last one is the pilgrimage to Mecca, which is that sometime in your life, if you have the financial means to and the physical ability to, you are supposed to take the Hajj and the pilgrimage to Mecca, which is something that hopefully we'll have a chance to explore in detail a little bit later. Um, in doing this, you'll become one of two types of Islam, right? And the main one, as I said earlier, is Sunni, about 85% of Muslims, and Shia Muslims are about 15% of Muslims. There are other sects, as I said, but those are the two big ones. There are some Sunnis that will not even acknowledge Shia exists because this comes down to an argument over who the successor to Muhammad is and whether he's infallible. And some people are like, nope, they're just wrong. They're just Muslims who don't fully understand this. Okay? Um, the other thing that you have to do in this is that you have to fully submit. Okay, so this is covered in the Shahada, but it also involves like actions and stuff like that. You have to fully submit to the oneness of Allah and the fact that it is His word and that Muhammad, peace be upon him, in this case, if you are Muslim at this point, is the messenger of God, and you have to just be okay with that, not necessarily understand it, but accept it as fact, take it on faith, and continue on. Now, Muslims will also follow a number of key laws. You have something called Sharia law that we might talk about, which is law based in and around Islam. You have socialization and dress, equal rights. Now, let's note, by the way, women do have complete equal rights under the law laid down within the Quran in Islam. Now, that's been interpreted in weird ways, but as far as inheriting and stuff like that, they could definitely inherit in a place when Christian women couldn't in 610 and stuff like that. That's changed some, but originally that was the idea, right? And dietary restrictions. A lot of these are local customs and or things that came later. The big part for all Muslims, right? Because some are going to follow halal and some aren't and stuff like that, are the 5 pillars of faith and the oneness and belief in Allah. Okay. So there we go. That's all I got for Intro to Islam. Check out the short video on the Religious Literacy Project, as well as what they have to say about their kind of intro that'll go into a few more details, as well as unpack some of the things I explored here. And then once you think about what it is you want to study. And hopefully over the next 3 weeks, we can, explore this enough to be able to talk somewhat intelligently about it, or as my favorite professor in political science at Duke used to always say, at least make you slightly more interesting at cocktail parties. Enjoy the next few days, guys, and I'll have stuff up for you for the rest of the week soon.